Imagine lying on a beach. You let the white sun pass through your fingers. The turquoise water seems to be radiating. The waves provide a gentle hum, accompanying you to a well-deserved nap. The sand may be coarse and get everywhere, but you don't care. You love the feeling as much as the touch of the girl next to you, who you picked up salsa dancing the other night. Imagine traveling the world to experience all the splendor nature has to offer. Climbing mountains, you feel on top of the world, literally. A fresh breeze invigorates you. Strolling through a forest, you discover a lake hidden in the evening mist. A mystical scenario reminiscent of a fantasy novel. Or maybe you prefer to visit foreign places. Imagine immersing yourself in different cultures. You feel the pulse of vibrant cities. You connect with the historic heritage and beauty. Imagine having all the time you want, losing yourself between the pages of a favorite book. Time does not exist in your world, for you have all the time in the world. Now imagine that being your life. There seems to be one obvious problem though. One thing standing in the way. Something like this. Or this. Or this. Or maybe this. Historically, there have always been voices that advocated for leisure instead. Usually, the need for work was accepted, but the buck was delegated to someone else. For ancient philosophers, this meant slaves. For a 19th century aristocrat, this meant the working class. And for fans of Tim Ferris' 4-Hour-Workweek, this could mean some guy in India. Before we can address the desire to eliminate work though, we have to take a short dive into history and look at the reasons for why increasingly bigger chunks of people's lives were devoted to it in the first place. In the beginning, there wasn't much work. God himself limited himself to one creative outburst of 6 days before laying back to enjoy his creation. Humanity was tasked to tend the Garden of Eden. Again, there was a short creative outburst so that every animal could get a cool name like frog, giraffe, or Pogon. There were a few ongoing tasks of what to do and not to do, but in absence of any predatory species, droughts or climate extremes, one didn't have to worry too much about getting all the necessities of life without spending too much time. When we look at Paleolithical times, the story is similar. For most of human history, work wasn't that much of a deal. The main object was to get food on the table. To achieve this goal, real-life Adams and Eves may not have had a 4-hour work week, but from the time fire was mastered, they were close. The old preconception that before the onset of civilization, life in general had to be nasty, brutish and short, was challenged back in the 1960s. An anthropological study of the Kung Bushmen in northeast Botswana revealed that the adults of the tribe worked on average 17 hours a week, 6 hours a day for 2.5 days. A fraction of the hours most adults in developed countries put in. So, it is reasonable to assume that hunter-gatherers worked about 3 to 5 hours a day on average. They hunted and gathered only when hungry and simply moved camps when resources needed time to recover. That left enough time for religious practices, funeral arrangements, artwork, plain old sleep. Not having to dread tomorrow, they were able to focus on the present. Anthropologist Marshall Sahlins called it the original affluent society. Wants may be easily satisfied either by producing much or desiring little. So it's not that curious that multiple times hunter-gatherer communities aware of farming chose not to change. Like Aborigines in northeast Australia or the indigenous inhabitants of California. But for most of humanity, as it always does, change didn't come. When God casted out man from the garden, he made a dire warning. Cursed is the ground because of you. Through painful toil you will eat fruit from it all the days of your life. It will produce thorns and thistles for you, and you will eat the plants of the field. By the sweat of your brow you will eat your food. The biblical story illustrates how the need for work exploded after the event of farming. Not as a result of one bad decision, but as a result of many inconsequential looking steps. The Neolithic revolution took place independently in at least 11 different areas. Firstly, 12,000 years ago in the Middle East. Over just a few thousand years, the planet was swept by this new way of life and new way of thinking. From dusk till dawn, men and women alike took care of the needs of their new plant masters. Clearing fields, tilling the soil, weeding and watering. Sedentariness was now a requisition, not a choice. As the population grew more and more time and effort had to be expended on cultivating plants. There was more food overall, yes, but the extra calories went to more bellies and pampered elites, so that average Joe and Jane enjoyed a lesser quality of life. Life became insecure when it depended on the well-being of very few plants like wheat, instead of dozens of different food sources. Farmers were therefore more likely to encounter existentially threatening famines caused by depleted soil, droughts, floods, and pathogens. To counter these risks to at least a certain extent, the attention had to be focused on the future. Timing became important. All farmers were dependent on a calendar determined by the growth cycle of their crops, or livestock. There were times to fertilize, times to plant, times to harvest, times to store, and times to transport to market. Not everything was glum though. Peasants were not on the clock, since clocks weren't invented yet. Since workload was depending on the seasons, there were periods of time that work tailed off. So, in the icy winter, for example, there would be weeks of reprieve, where one could give thanks for still being alive. Pretty much nothing happened for thousands of years. Yes, here and there cities and empires emerged, but for the average Joe, nothing changed that much. Working as farmers, they employed the same basic technology. With the Industrial Revolution, work time for migrants to the cities exploded, while working conditions worsened. A lack of regulation and an abundance of cheap labor meant that the owner of mills and factories could basically take whatever they wanted out of the workers. And they did. 16 hours a day for every day except Sunday and Christmas Day, if your boss wasn't Scrooge. On top of that, work tended to be mind-numbing and repetitive. Realizing that deprived workers were not productive workers, some wealthy factory owners started supporting their workers. In the middle of the 19th century, they were better off materially. And in the wake of productive increases due to new management techniques in the early 20th century, working hours for manual labor declined precipitously. Worker unions did their part as well, growing more and more in power and influence. In America, the working day reached 8 hours a day in the 1920s. Henry Ford played a big role in promoting a 40-hour week by cutting the working week in his factories to 5 days. This model was adopted nationwide in 1940, and even earlier in Europe, of course. John Maynard Keynes looked at the steady increase in productivity and predicted a 15-hour work week for the generation of his grandchildren. This obviously didn't happen. Already in the 1930s, in the midst of the Great Depression, there were aspirations to cut down even further on work time. One bill, the Black Canary 30-hour bill, was pulled by President Roosevelt in the last minute. There were advocates from the private sector as well. One interesting example was that of cereal giant Kellogg's. Like Ford before him, Kellogg's believed himself to be a trailblazer when he was cutting working hours in his factories to 30 hours. 20 years later, the bold experiment came to an end. A new management didn't share Kellogg's philosophy of welfare capitalism and more traditionally equated longer working hours as progress. It found allies amidst the employees, and many departments voted to return to the old 8-hour shifts. Why? Well, some men didn't like the idea of spending more hours with their irritable spouses. But most men wanted just to earn more, so they could consume more. Consumerism reigned supreme. leisure was reduced to watching TV for a couple of hours a day to get to the commercials. The composition of the labor force changed. Instead of agriculture or industry, the leading source of employment became services and administrative tasks. Individual work time remained roughly the same, while the workforce itself expanded. And there are pockets of the working world that are reversing the trend of declining working hours. In Asia, we have the infamous Japanese work culture that produced the official category of karoshi or karoshi-satsu, death or suicide caused by overwork. While the law in China limits the working week to 44 hours, this is frequently ignored by employers, especially those in the technology sector. Here, all too often, the so-called 996 work schedule is expected, meaning the staff is expected to work from 9 a.m. to 9 p.m. for 6 days a week. When the COVID-19 pandemic swept the globe, many businesses pivoted to a working from home model. There have been reports that people working from home have ended up working longer hours than usual. Home workers in the US, Canada and the UK have seen the amount of time they are logged into their computers increase by more than 2 hours per day, according to research by NordVPN teams.
You know, 80 to 100 hour weeks.
60 to 70 hours a week.
Okay.
At least 14 hours a day. And so that's about 100 hours a week.
67. When I was your age, I worked 100 to 120 hours a week.
Jesus, damn.
So now that we've seen the major role work played throughout human history, let's consider the more important question: why? Why, after all these years, are we still obsessed by the divine decree to eat our food by the sweat of our brow? What is work actually good for? We can distinguish extrinsic from intrinsic motives. The first answer is pretty much obvious and is in keeping with the focus of early hunter-gatherers to modern workers, providing the basic necessities of life, like food, shelter, or energy. For that, you need money. For Adam Smith, father of modern economics, that was pretty much the only thing that could motivate people to do anything. For in his eyes, people were lazy and simply would not work without a paycheck. That fits well with the kind of labor he envisaged, most famously his touted ultra-efficient pin factory. But just like many economists' theories, the problem is that people tend to behave differently. The rational man should be content with working as little as possible, so he had to expend the least amount of effort. Well, everyone knows someone who fits the description. I'm talking to you, Karl. But disregarding people who just can't afford to lose any of their income, that still leaves a lot of people working way more than is to be expected. What else could there be? There are certainly other external perks. Trust and respect from co-workers and superiors alike can be a factor. So does status. Working long hours is often seen as a badge of honor, climbing the corporate ladder a worthwhile mission. However, work also does and needs to offer intrinsic motivations. People prefer the work to have meaning. When is work considered meaningful? Generally speaking, when the worker is able to have an impact on the world. Imagine working on a presentation about a topic you are very passionate about. Even unpaid, this would seem a worthwhile activity, but on top you are very well compensated for it. So you work hard every evening on your presentation, double checking every slide and statistic, rehearsing in front of the mirror, etc. Then you get a call from your boss. Presentation is cancelled. You're still getting paid, but no one will ever see the fruit of your labor. How do you feel about your work now? In one experiment, participants were paid a small amount of money to build Lego Bionicles. The pay decreased with each additional Bionicle built. In another group, the pay was identical, but every completed Bionicle was instantly dismantled before the participants' eyes. Participants in the first group built over 50% more Bionicles than the participants in the second group, where even the smallest meaning was eliminated. The absence of meaning completely crushed the motivation for work. Like preparing a presentation no one is ever gonna see. Meaning is enhanced further if one can positively affect the life of others. Let's have a look at cleaning. On the face of it, not a desirable job with a high rate of job satisfaction. It is low paid, and though not meaningless, hardly a place to make an impact. Interacting with other human beings is not even part of the job description. But in a series of interviews Amy Wrzesniewski took with hospital custodians, it turned out that the happiest custodians had a very different idea of what their job actually entailed. For them, it wasn't about picking up trash, mopping the floor, vacuuming offices, cleaning toilets, etc. More important was to make patients and their families feel comfortable. Lend them an ear if they felt the need for talking, cheer them up, divert them from their pain and fear. Through their interactions with people in a most vulnerable state, they created meaning. Okay, there's another intrinsic motivator, and this one is a bit counterintuitive. According to some influential voices, instead of providing a means for happiness, work is supposed to be the exact opposite: sacrifice. This point of view has clear religious connotations and is especially popular in Puritan thinking. Idle hands are the devil's workshop. Who works doesn't have the time to sin. There's more to it though. Work is supposed to have a special quality that doesn't only take him away from sin but move him towards divinity. A man perfects himself by working. Consider how even in the meanest sorts of labor, the whole soul of man is composed into a kind of real harmony the instant he sets himself to work. Doubt, desire, remorse, indignation, despair itself, all these, like hell dogs, lie beleaguering the soul of the poor day worker, as of every man. But he bends himself with free valor against his task, and all these are stilled. All these shrink, murmuring far off into their caves. The man is now a man. The blessed glow of labor in him, is it not purifying fire, wherein all poison is burned up? Who art thou that complainest of thy life of toil? Complain not. Look up, my weary brother. See thy fellow workmen there in God's eternity, sacred band of the immortals, celestial bodyguard of the empire of man. Our highest religion is named the worship of sorrow. For the Son of Man there is no noble crown, well worn or even ill worn, but there is a crown of thorns. Okay, this might sound a little bit over the top, but herein lies an explanation for why workers prefer to continue to work, even if their job is exhausting, boring, humiliating, and not well compensated. Work seems to have become an end for itself, an end that forms character and offers a sense of dignity and self-worth, not because it's enjoyable, but because it's miserable. That's the deeper reason the unemployed tend to be vilified. A lack of work gets equated with a lack of character. So what to make of these benefits? First of all, they do not apply to all work. Status, for example, is a zero-sum game that produces at least one loser for every winner, whereby winners tend not to enjoy the temporary standing anyway. But let's focus on the big ones: compensation and meaning. If you're willing to work very, very hard, that will lead to one and only one thing. You will find someone who gives you the chance to work really, really hard. Many people think that if they work really, really hard, the chip will come in. Ancient peasants believed that, as do 21st century MLM participants. It probably won't, so maybe, just maybe, there should be something else. Where the existence of the working poor lays the axe to the rags to riches fairy tale, the modern phenomena of bullshit jobs lays the axe to the argument of meaning. Late anthropologist David Graeber defined a bullshit job as a form of paid employment that is so completely pointless, unnecessary, or pernicious that even the employee cannot justify its existence. There are some obvious examples to think of where jobs appear pointless or even produce more harm than good. Take advertisement for gambling, alcohol, or cigarettes. But according to Graeber, over a third of all jobs fall into the category entirely. They can be organized further in elaborate subcategorizations. Taskmasters, for example, assign people and supervise work that would be handled in any case. Corporate goons like lawyers or lobbyists, flunkies like doormen or receptionists who make their masters feel important. Workplace design can be utilized to boost meaning, but there are limits. Consider Sisyphus, whose work was limited to roll a boulder up a hill, only to see it roll back down shortly afterwards. French philosopher Albert Camus once famously advised to picture Sisyphus as a happy man. A legitimate philosophical possibility, yes, but
Come on, man.
When you're reciting a script to scam people, all the mental gymnastics in the world might not be enough. Factories, fulfillment and call centers, office jobs to a great extent. A majority of jobs cannot be fulfilling. It is time to at least consider alternatives.
Build your
40-hour-a-week
yacht.
work week is bullshit.
Bullshit.
It's
You're not
bullshit.
productive that
9-to-5s are legitimately the biggest scam ever ran in the universe.
Nobody should do it.
Today, I could relax, enjoy life around my mansion, watching the waterfall in the front, the waterfall in the back, the pool look like the lake, waterfall inside the house. I got tired of hearing the water running.
9 to 5, 9 to 5.
not
Morning,
even 9 to
Sam.
5.
Morning, Bob. 9 to 5.
We will need a two-pronged approach. On the one hand, bills will have to be paid to keep the lights on. On the other hand, something has to be found to offer meaning. Historically, there were times when working hours were reduced without simultaneously reducing the standard of living. And as we have seen, extrapolating into the future, a workless society seemed a natural prediction for the future. Less than 100 years ago, that would have been a mainstream prediction. Today, not so much. There are of course still those who predict that robots will take over, but they are confronted with the failure of past predictions. Also, for these prophets of technological unemployment, automation is usually not a good thing. Instead of post-work utopia, a technological elite reaps the benefits of automation. The rest is left in the dust. Instead of being empowered, the masses are being devalued. At some point, the future went wrong. Instead of waiting for utopia to arrive, is there an option to at least create a workless world for oneself? The term 4-hour workweek was coined by Tim Ferris in his highly influential book by the same name, published in 2007. Though not quite reaching the heights of famous con artists like Napoleon Hill, even today it still sits high in the self-help section of bookstores around the globe. Ferris offers a system to escape the dark fate of sitting behind a desk till age 70, selling precious time for little money, only getting the short relief of weekends and maybe short vacations. First, eliminate as much work as possible without reducing output, for example by using Pareto's principle, i.e. focusing on the 20% of activities that produce 80% of desired outcome. Then provide a scalable product that offers value or at least apparent value, like a course on getting rich. Finally, enjoy your newfound freedom. I don't want to discuss the practicality of this model, at least in this video. That has already gone on for way too long. Although the lifestyle of the touted newly rich seems to depend on the not so rich that presumably have to work more than 4 hours. The guys organizing your schedule, packing your product, answering customer questions, etc. Suffice it to say, you're going to need the right amount of knowledge and enough people that find enough value in whatever you're doing. Now, suppose you have succeeded where most did not. How do you fill the void that remains after work has been eliminated? Two diametrical different approaches merit a closer look. For one, there's mastery. Mastery is a process of perfecting a skill using deliberate practice, a highly structured and purposeful form of learning. It is a road less taken, for mainly one reason. It's freaking hard. Irrespective of the task at hand, it takes years of deliberate effort to reach a goal of mastery. The path, though ultimately rewarding, is one of many thorns and pitfalls. Deliberate practice is not enjoyable itself. Is this a path for everyone? Well, at the very least it's an option for a great many people. Innate talent is overrated. The myth that you need a stellar high IQ to really shake things up, it's just that, a myth. It is surprisingly easy to come up with lists of geniuses who based on their IQ would not be accepted to Mensa, like Nobel laureate Richard Feynman or mathematician Henry Poincaré. Hard work and determination to develop the desired skills trump the early advantage of natural talent. Sounds like too much work? There's another option. Play. Play is a mode of being far too important to be left to children. German philosopher and psychologist Karl Groos was the first to describe it as an extremely useful product of natural selection. He argued that play was a means to ensure that necessary skills were being practiced. The basis for play he described as the pleasure at being the course. Play is therefore important to develop a strong sense of control over one's life, which in turn is an effective antidote against depression or anxiety. Essential to play is that it is voluntary and intrinsically motivated. If someone feels cheated and calls off the game is over. You don't play for the result. Because nobody is taking score, everybody wins. Primitive creatures need to base their lives on purpose and surviving, to find food, shelter, safety. But when creatures find their existence no longer endangered, they can develop a second way of living, play. They begin doing things for the hell of it. We see hundreds of different creatures acting in the play mode. Puppies and kittens and bear cubs and human children. Children racing each other from one tree to another but not caring who wins. As soon as a child cares if he wins, then it becomes purposeful and stops being play. And you humans took a wrong step on the evolutionary road when purpose became your primary mode and play was seen as childish. In our evolution, we chose play and see seriousness as childish. These two roads, mastery and play, are very different. One ultra-competitive, the other not competitive at all. Both work because they offer an important component of a fulfilled life: agency, the ability to act free and independent. Working insane long hours is still glorified, for reasons that even under superficial inspection don't hold up. It doesn't lead to greater success, it doesn't lead to greater productivity, it doesn't lead to meaningful contributions for society. Maybe it earns you the respect of guys like... But what's that worth? Make an impact instead. Have some fun. Or both. Bird songs are one of the most beautiful naturally occurring sounds. Their main purpose is very hands-on. Birds will sing to mark the territory or to attract a mate for nesting. But of late, indications accumulated that birds will sing for their own enjoyment as well. In contrast to the shorter and more monotone songs attributed to territorial defense, these songs rank among the most beautiful.